Hello and welcome to this very special BIFA Insider Q&A today for The Selfish Giant. My name is Anna Smith. I'm a film critic and a big fan of the film, so it is my great pleasure to welcome Amy Hubbard, the casting director on the film. Welcome, Amy.
Thanks, Anna.
You've been tweeting throughout. Thank you for your questions. Please send some more questions in. Meantime, Amy and I will have a chat about the film. I mean, what a tremendous film. I loved watching that again. I don't know if you sort of got more from it again, watching that again.
Yeah, I got a huge amount, because to get a bit of distance from it and a couple of years to go by and to be able to finally watch it objectively, I feel really moved by it, actually. And I'm so proud of all the performances, and I'm really proud to have been involved, yeah.
Well, the two young boys we'll start with first, of course. What tremendous discoveries. How did you find them and how did you go about finding them?
Connor, who plays Arbor, who's the shorter blonde boy, met him on the very first day of casting.
Wow.
So we went to, because Clio and I had already worked together on a film set in Bradford, so we had a school that the playwright Andrea Dunbar had gone to years ago, which is what her first film was all about.
Albert,
yeah. And so we went back to BBEC, and they're the kind of school that understand what I'm looking for, which is not all the kids who necessarily make a beeline for the drama lessons. And in fact, Connor just showed up at the auditions that I was doing there to get out of whatever lesson was happening that day, and was a complete natural. And I knew we had one of the kids. I didn't quite believe it, but he was so naturally talented that was that. It took longer than that to book him, because you can't just present one person to a director, and you have to compare and contrast and go through a process. But and the second boy, Sean Thomas, I'd been to his school, but he'd been away. He'd been at a horse fair the day I went into his school. But it was so great, all the kids that I met when I visited. I decided to go back there and see, have you got anybody else, you know, that I should meet? Okay. And there he was, and even sitting outside the room we were using to audition, he was sort of entertaining the troops. There was only about 3 of us in the room, but it was like watching a stand-up show. And before we even went to the room, I had a great feeling that he was the kid. And the polar opposite in looks and energy and everything to Connor. There was probably about a 2-month gap between meeting the two boys, and very shortly after we had both of them, we could go ahead and commit and book them for the roles.
And then you kind of obviously test them against each other to see how they bounce off each other?
Yes.
How was that first time?
It was really natural, and both boys knew, they're not hugely close now, the boys, but at the time they knew what was required, and they were happy to get along and play chemistry, you know? And they were bright enough to know what was being required of them.
Sure.
I'm not a huge fan for huge amounts of callbacks and heavy on the chemistry tests, because actually if you really play chemistry with somebody, it looks really artificial. But if you're just light with each other, whether it's a husband and wife or two friends or siblings, you buy that more, don't you? You buy the credibility. So it was just one session where we made sure that they weren't allergic to each other.
Yeah, exactly.
And we didn't have time to do more than that, but I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, well, it certainly works. Works. I mean, there's a question that's slightly relevant to what we're talking about now that we've had come in. How would an actor approach you if they didn't have a casting agent?
A casting director. A talent agent and then casting director.
Yeah.
They're very welcome to write. And when I do very conventional, streamlined, mainstream searches for something that's quite high profile, it's quick. I only go through agents. I'm quite blinkered or blinded, as they say in Bradford. You know, the blinkers on horses are called blinders there, and that's what it's like being a casting director. I'm not interested for most of the time when it's something that faces a huge deadline and you've got to go out and perform and carry episodes of Homeland and things like that. That wouldn't be a huge search. But when I'm open to it, when I have a director who's willing to put in a great search and a producer who's willing to pay for it, that's when I'll open up, and I use social media a lot, and I go into schools and I try and network as much as I can. So, for example, I'm working on something in Leeds at the moment. I just make myself as available as I can so that people can access me. Word of mouth.
Yeah.
You above social media, you cannot beat word of mouth.
So keep your ears open and cross your fingers.
Yes.
Yeah. People also dying to know what happened to the two young actors from this film.
Well, Sean Thomas is now starring in Sacha Baron Cohen's next film, Grimsby, playing his son, and no better person, because as I say, his comedy chops are second to none. Yeah. And Connor has done quite a few pieces. He's different. Connor is more of a film actor, you know. So I know he's been in a couple of episodes of television, but you know, when I met up with him last year, I did sort of advise him to only stick to film because he needs more rehearsal time.
Okay.
He needs somebody who understands that the way he works slightly. It doesn't quite work for him, the sort of tight deadlines of television, you know. But they both have fantastic agents and have continued to act, which is great.
Yes, quite right. Another question we have come in. What's more important when you're casting, the look of someone or the personality? To match what's on the paper, really,
yeah, 100% personality for me. Right. Obviously, we're hampered sometimes if it's a leading role for, again, you know, particularly television or a bigger feature. They've got to have, you know, very often we end up with a great-looking lead.
Sure.
But for me, it's personality and talent above everything else, and then look is second, you know.
I've heard you use the word kind of natural and naturalistic. I mean, how do you spot that in someone, and how would you define that more closely?
Yeah, it's the ability to just tell the truth and sound realistic and sound like yourself in front of whether the camera's on or off, you know.
Right.
So we often, obviously we have a bit of a chat before we record an actor or a young person or anything, and then if they sound markedly different once we go into the scene, then we've got a problem. There are so many actors that we are looking for people to be themselves. Until you're Tom Hardy, until you're a chameleon, then brilliant, you know, transform away. But until then, it's about delivering lines in the most credible and truthful way. So it's difficult for actors, particularly British actors who are so well trained and they want to bring so much power and intensity to auditions. But it's right back to that ability to be brave. We keep talking about bravery during that film, to strip everything away. And David Mamet's expression, just say the lines, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, in a way, is that quite refreshing to be working with young people because they haven't yet sort of been through all the training process that may kind of knock that out of them a little bit?
Absolutely, yeah. So when I work with kids, before I introduce them to the director, I don't worry too much about getting too close to what the role is.
Right.
But I try and take away all those bad habits, try and get them to naturalise. And it only takes sort of 3 goes at a scene to get someone to naturalise, if they can do it. And then I always say to the kids, and how does that feel? Does that feel better? And they're thrilled with themselves because it just feels like a more honest exchange, you know, and they really enjoy it. They don't really enjoy being told what actions to do by their parent or their drama coach or whoever else gets to them before me.
Who does, especially children.
Yeah, exactly. And they know that's false, you know, so they have a great time when they strip it back and just allow themselves to play, you know.
Wonderful. When you finish the casting process, how much do you stay in touch with the production and with the cast?
Well, it's very difficult particularly for a film as intimate as the process was on that film and how close we were as a community. It's very difficult for me to withdraw from that, and I find it very difficult as I, you know, get the train back to London and they all go on to socialise and bond and become this sort of travelling circus together, and I'm on to the next job. And the next time I see the actor, you know, they don't know who I am.
Really?
But, yeah, that happens quite a lot.
Does it?
Yeah. Oh. But I definitely check in with producers and directors to find out how it's going, how are people performing, how are people behaving. It goes hand in hand. You know, you've got to behave. We don't get away with it anymore on a film set if you don't behave yourself, adults or kids.
Yeah.
And what's the commitment like? And also I check in with agents and actors to find out how it's going from their angle, you know. And I like a nice debrief at the end of everything because you learn.
Yes, of course.
Mistakes are made, you know, particularly when you work with someone like Clio who's willing to take risks, you know. You know, touch wood, we've not made a mistake yet, but you want to find out how it went. You want feedback, so you learn for the next process.
Yeah, everyone needs feedback, I guess, for their jobs and so on.
Yeah.
Some questions we've had a bit about to do with diversity and such, which is an interesting and topical question at the moment. If there is no race on the page for a character, how much responsibility do you feel to look at actors of all ethnicities?
A huge responsibility, and I have to admit that even my mum, because I come from a casting dynasty, there's 4 of us who cast. So my parents started the business in the 70s, and even then I remember them being colourblind and bringing in whoever they goddamn felt like, you know, at the time. So you do feel a huge responsibility, and I'm really curious to see how things go, because in theatre, casting is colourblind. You can have a family that are from every ethnicity, you know, and once the narrative takes over, it's a suspension of disbelief anyway. You don't question it. If you have a question, it lasts exactly 1 second before the story takes over. And I wonder, will we ever get there in film and television? You know, I hope so.
I hope so too. Yeah.
So apart from all the obvious points, like more writers and more scripts and all the rest of it, not just for
because that's where it starts. Obviously, you're presented with something a lot of time, and you have no option, I presume.
Yeah, not just for diversity friendly, but female roles and all the usual stuff that people are trying to access. But I wonder, could we go even further with that?
Yeah. How much character description do you like to see in a script?
Not too much. A sentence is great, and then it's great just to try stuff. I keep saying, I often say to my directors, am I okay to just try stuff? Can I just keep trying stuff? And it's great to have that freedom. And very often they'll have a strong vision about the landscape, the dynamic, the demeanour of the piece, how it's going to feel, But beyond that, you are free to just try things, So, for example, on the Selfish Giant, we went into schools that were predominantly Asian, and we were we tried to see if that would work for Arbor and Swifty. It didn't quite, because they didn't quite have, horses and scrapping for metal in their genes in the same way as, Sean and Connor did, in those areas and those schools that I looked at, that were ultimately successful. But,
We were talking during the film that I love the way that you cast lots of people from the community in that kind of random, wonderful ways. Can you give us any examples of that?
Yeah, well, there's a teacher in there playing a teacher who I'd met at one of the schools that I went to, and she was brilliant. I think she had acted before, but she hadn't done it for a long time. But she was brilliant on the day and didn't lose her bottle. She's the receptionist where the boys are sitting when they've been excluded.
Oh, right, yes, yeah.
And there was one guy, Patrick McCann, who's got the wonderful sofa scene with Steve Everts, and they improv that up. And Patrick, actually I saw him earlier this week in Leeds, and he brought his two grandchildren in for a workshop, because we initially just workshopped this a little bit, this script, just to sort of find our feet with it and to see what was out there and what it felt like in Bradford and who might be right. So he brought his two kids in, who were ultimately too young for the roles, but I just thought he was this brilliant personality sitting out there in reception, looking for attention.
Spotted.
And in he went, and he was wonderful.
And quite excited to be in it, I guess.
Yeah, totally natural. He'd be the first to admit that Steve Everts gave him loads of help on the day about and rehearsals, because he was in Malta on his holidays when there was rehearsals, so Clio wasn't available then to rehearse when he actually turned up to shoot the scene, but Steve really helped him. And then Patrick did loads of improv. He's such a natural in front of the camera, and it all stayed in. But his day job is a lorry driver, But as long as you pay him more than he earns on that, he'll do your films.
I'm sure he will. Exactly. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Now, of course, obviously, the children have chaperones. How do they tend to feel about the swearing? Have you ever had any objections about that kind of thing?
No, I haven't. Kids absolutely love swearing, and if you get a swear word in an audition piece, they really enjoy doing it, and being given the permission to do it. Not only by parents, but teachers are okay with it as well, because they understand that to be in a film is a great opportunity. Yeah. I wouldn't do a film that involved asking a kid to do anything that I'd be uncomfortable asking my daughter to do.
Yeah, of course.
And I do feel quite strongly that, sometimes we have to watch parents who are so willing to hand their kids over to be in front of the screen, and I'd love to see a little bit more protection around that area. I think we've got a lot to learn still, But in terms of swearing, I've never had problems.
Yes. No. Very good. We've had another question about actors and so on. If you've had a bad experience with an agent, might that put you off dealing with their clients in future?
It's not half as heated, the relationship between casting directors and agents, as it was before the days of email, before there was proof. I did send those sides or whatever. But it still can get heated. We're dealing with people's feelings if they don't get the role, or we're dealing with we're doing deals essentially. Which can get quite heated. Budgets are tight, the actor is worth more than what we're offering. Things can get heated. But we need agents. It's a very symbiotic relationship, same as they need us. So any kind of vendetta would last about 30 minutes, I think.
Well, yes, exactly. Yes, you need each other, as you say.
Exactly, and you learn to get over it very quickly. We're in a very passionate business, and we're all a bit theatrical. And honestly, any reputable caster, you wouldn't carry that. You'd get over it quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess you know all the agents in the business.
There seem to be new ones cropping up every day, but I know a lot of them. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And now another question, do you mostly cast from London talent, or do you look elsewhere in the UK?
Yes, generally what I do is relatively conventional, and I sit in London and the actors come to me and audition. Increasingly it's the world of self-tapes where people will, audition at home and send that to me. But my favourite thing is to get out there with my little wheelie suitcase and try and discover talent somewhere where they wouldn't even know that this was a job. Or how to access it as a job, even if they were interested in acting.
So working with Clio is the ideal kind of person because these are the films she makes.
Absolutely.
That naturalism.
Yeah. And anybody, and also a producer again who will pay for you to go and search somewhere where the story is based, so you actually end up with the correct, landscape and feel of the piece. So you end up with some more authenticity. I have travelled in the past to all sorts of places, Ghana being one of my favourites on a Peter Kosminski thing when I was very early 20s. I just went out to do all the kids in Ghana for something called The Dying of the Light. But now it's just England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales.
Right.
But that's great. Yeah.
Now obviously casting's in your family, but if it's not and someone would like to be a casting director, what would your advice be?
Get in the door of agents are good too. So that really, because there's many more agents than there are casting directors. As in, to be a casting director, it's good for you to have experience as an agency as well.
Okay.
But your ultimate goal is to get not 1 week of work experience or internship at a casting director's office, 4 weeks minimum, because it's only around week 3 that you'll get trusted to talk on the phone to the scary eights. Some of them are quite intimidating. And we've got a lot to do in a short space of time, and agents expect you to be on the ball. So it would be about week 3, unless you're incredibly intelligent, that you'd be trusted with actually being put on the phones. On week 4, you might be allowed to read in with an actor, in an audition. So hang around. You should get, you should get paid, and that is all.
Totally.
There are guidelines for that from the Casting Directors Guild. But try and stick it out for as long as you can, and listen when you're in the office. But as I say, if you can get in for longer than 1 or 2 weeks, then the gates open. You get trusted, and you suddenly become indispensable.
You learn. Yeah. Do you have something specific and you look for in terms of the projects that you cast?
No, I'm really lucky because casting directors get pigeonholed same as actors do, and I've done everything from fantasy to episodic like 24 and Homeland and independent features. I haven't done comedy, and that's okay.
Really?
But yeah, I find it quite cliquey, and understandably the directors want to work with people that they trust to get the laughs out of. So there's not much scope there to really introduce new talent to comedy directors. As in, I respect that. And I love watching comedy. Yeah. But I think my favourite things, no, I don't have a favourite, because I love the pace of, and The Hobbit, I've done fantasy as well. Yes. And I love the pace of television, because very often on a Fox job, I work for Fox a lot, and the script will come out maybe on a Sunday, you'll be briefed about what they're looking for, and somebody has to be on a plane somewhere to shoot the role by around Wednesday, and I'm addicted to the pace of that. I love it.
Deadline.
Yeah.
Deadline, yeah.
But, as I say, again, to go out and to discover talent and to work very closely over a long period of time with a director is ultimately the most fulfilling and rewarding, and that sense of achievement stays with me for a long time. Yeah.
How much does a director, hopefully they trust you completely, but how much do they get involved, or how much do you tend to present?
Yeah, I'm lucky that is an element of what I would look for. Is I wouldn't be willing at this stage to work with somebody who didn't trust me. Yeah. So, for example, if I saw 30 kids or 30 adults, but only shared 10 reads with a director or producer, they would have to trust me, and they do. So Yeah, I do. I find there is an element of trust. People will have researched me and how I work and how thorough I am, and that trust would be, as I say, a criteria for taking the project on in the first place.
Right. Yeah. So that needs to be in place.
Yes.
I understand that, and clearly you and Clio have
Yeah.
got that in
And
spades.
I'm lucky because one thing about having a director who's in the room with you or in the same city as you, but I also work for a lot of directors who I've never met and are thousands of miles away. And I really enjoy that as well when you're put in such a trusted position that you're about to send someone to set based on your reputation and based on your recommendations.
Success, exactly. Yeah. Well, one of the viewers wants to know, what's the main difference between working on something huge like The Hobbit and a small independent film?
The time you have. On The Hobbit, again, we were free to just try stuff, as I said, and that went on for 18 months, and you could just tape people and see what worked. And I was off page being, when you know your script off by heart. I was off page, let alone the actor.
Yeah.
By the end of that, and whereas this, you've got a constant pressure of with a low budget piece of cracking it within days, weeks, if you have to. But there's that race against time in order to keep the money down, which is challenging, but worth doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rewarding. Yeah. And do you have a trick for getting certain performances out of actors when someone wants to know?
I'm very blunt.
Right.
And I think, because I think most casters stay quiet in the room with actors, and they'd rather not say anything to them until the director's there. But it's naturalising, because that is, again, another similarity on everything I work on, no matter what it is, we want natural. Yeah. So the style of The Selfish Giant is exactly what we're looking for in all the projects I've just mentioned.
Yes.
You're looking for that sort of base palette of somebody being 100% credible when they're just having a conversation. And I don't have tricks. I have my honesty.
Okay.
Which so far goes down well. People tend to, I feel that people are very grateful, because if you're honest with them, they can actually adjust their performance and have a chance of getting the job.
Right. So honest with them about how they're performing and what they could do to improve it.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Have you ever, naming no names, had instances where you've had to go back and recast someone where there's been problems?
Yes. Yeah. Generally, it's behaviour.
Okay.
Yeah. Where people have not have been late or have had given attitude to someone in makeup or even in rehearsal if they've held back a little bit and been a little bit complacent. All of those elements. I've never had to recast anybody who didn't perform as
that's
expected.
Interesting.
Yeah. But yeah, it's generally behaviour. It's a huge element of acting now. You're very judged if you're not on time with a great attitude, You don't have to be a slave. You don't have to put yourself in danger. Those are all things where there are boundaries. But you do, you have to be polite. You have to be somebody that people want to have around for, for example, in the case of The Hobbit, that's years of working together in a small community in New Zealand, and then all the press junket, that's
exactly
same amount of time again on top. So you've got to be a good egg,
Yeah, no room for divas in this business. Yeah.
No.
Do you think it's got more like that because professionalism's increased, or just everyone's watching you, or
I don't know why it's got more of that, because it definitely has. We used to put up with more addiction on the job, and we used to put up, I'm talking about a long time ago, and a few more probing questions or involvement in costume and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know why it's going that way. I think the deadlines are tighter. Everybody needs to, we're making more programs,
Yes, yeah.
Things are happening much faster, and it's just not tolerated anymore. It's not tolerated behind the camera anymore, the way people used to, directors used to scream and shout, and so did casting directors. That is a thing of the past, I hope.
Well, that's good to know. No sort of dramatic hissy fits or anything.
Yeah, exactly. It still happens, but
I'm sure it does occasionally. Confront it.
Yeah.
Well, before we wrap up, let's talk a little bit about what else you're up to. Can you tell us more about your future projects?
Yeah, I'm working at the moment on a film about called Storm in the Stars with Belle Powley and Doug Booth and Elle Fanning, about Mary Shelley and the crisis that induced the creation of Frankenstein, you know, which is an amazing, beautiful film, and also something not similar to The Selfish Giant, but I'm back to the same areas again, called the Moorside Project, which is a story set at the time that Karen Matthews, her child was missing, and it turned out that Karen Matthews knew where the child was. It's not about her, Karen, or her child, but it's about the women of the estate and what they went through at the time. And I'm really proud of it, you know, and that has my heart and soul going into it.
You touched briefly earlier on more exposure for sort of women and female characters. Is that something you feel passionately about moving forward, and one of the reasons you do these kind of projects?
Yeah, 100%. And that's and the Moorside Project, this which is ITV Studios for BBC, and it's Jeff Pope, who's an amazing writer, who's producing, and Neil Mackay, who wrote Appropriate Adult, has written it. And you cannot beat it for female roles and conversation, and I'm so proud of it in terms of it being a proper showcase for female performances. Yeah,
I can't wait to see everything you're working on. You've done a great job again in The Selfish Giant. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
For joining us today, and thank you all for watching and for your brilliant questions. Go to bifa.film if you want to find out more and see what we're up to next. Thank you very much.